Item 10 is the sport and rec grant allocation, and Councillor Sir John has obviously declared an interest, as he is the John Walker of the Find Your Field of Dreams, and this is his baby, so I think Sir John will acknowledge that you step back from that part of the decision. So we'll just, I think it's fairly straightforward. We've had a chance to discuss this in detail, but perhaps Kerry and Sharon and Mace, if you just want to introduce it for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning. I'd like to highlight a few key points outlined in the report. We received 33 applications, total funding request of 1.52 million, with a total funding pool of 508,000. Further to the committee workshop on the 15th of March, 7 organisations have been recommended for funding. Total funding requests exceed the funding pool, so we have allocated the recommended amount based on the projects that most strongly align. Happy to answer any questions on specific recommendations.
That's great, and thank you for attaching quite fulsome information in the back of the report. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Kerry, Sharon, and also for the workshop on the 15th, where we went through the application. So, thank you so much. But also to the crew that do the assessment based on the criteria, because at the workshop there were some questions asked in regards to why these ones did and why these ones didn't. The best thing, I think, is the fact that all applications and the detail regards to that was put into the councillors' room, and it was available to everybody to have a look at. So I just really wanted to say thank you so much, and just to endorse your comments, Chair. So thank you, ladies and Mace.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you please tell me how these organisations plan to acknowledge Auckland Council as a funder of what they do?
Sure. So as per the report, so outlined in the report, Clause 2 of the funding agreement recognition sets out the obligation of the grant recipient to give fair and proper acknowledgement of Council's support. So recipients acknowledge Council's funding through media releases, the use of Council logos on resources, the Auckland Council signage where appropriate, and also Council are acknowledged through various things such as speeches, like the launch of the new Bikes in Schools tracks.
So when they report back on their funding, do they report? Is that something that they report on as well?
Yes.
Good. And then, will as funders of these things, do councillors get the opportunity to participate or get invited to when things happen in schools, for example, in their areas? Because we're told that some of the programs, for example, might be in 15 schools, but we don't know which 15. But if there was a school in somebody's area, do you get an invite just to go along and have a look?
That's a good question. No. Why don't we ask that happen?
I think the local boards are getting invited, but not councillors.
Okay. So I think we can make that clear to the large groups that we are giving a lot of money to, that there's an interest by the local councillors in being involved as well. I think that's very fair. Good idea. Councillor Watson.
Thanks. With any of these successful applicants, do they have any charging regime themselves, like the ones that go into the schools? Do they charge for any of their activities?
No. So these are all, one of the key outcomes is that they're affordable and accessible.
Yeah.
So from what I understand, having looked at the applications and through the assessment and process, that none of them are charging for their programs.
Okay, all right. Just in terms of the bikes in school one, did they have any plan to, and I see they've got a very ambitious program to try and get every child on a bike. As part of their application, do they have any plan to engage or to use the staff resource of schools to achieve that laudable ambition?
Yes, so part of the package that the schools receive and part of the regional position is that they do actually have a coach or a cycle skills instructor that goes into those schools and does some mentoring with the teachers. So each teacher is actually given, it's 1 to 2 days of specific cycle skills training, so therefore it does become sustainable within the school.
Good question. Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Chair. So just on the bikes in schools too, which is, I'm just looking at that one. What input in our recommendation, or your recommendation to us, did Auckland Transport have, considering their travel-wise coordinators, and also what supplementary funding is this program getting from NZTA?
Great. If I may, through the Chair, just answer to your first question. Auckland Transport actually part funds the regional, forgotten the name, the regional Bikes and Schools manager role, so 0.4 FTE, so they part fund it, and so we're looking to part fund the other 0.4 FTE. And an answer to your second question, at this stage, NZTA don't fund the role, but they are the Bikes and Schools or Bike On Charitable Trust, but they very much support it.
Okay, so just going back to the AT role, so you've told me that this funding picks up the balance of that that lead role.
Correct.
But I'm just wanting to get a sense of our discussion with Auckland Transport as to where the Bikes and School program fits in to the TravelWise program, because they are doing that as well. So I'm just wanting to have some confidence that this decision of 83K for Bike NZ is fully informed by Auckland Transport's implementation of TravelWise.
Yes, so with Bikes and Schools, they do work with the TravelWise coordinators within the various areas, and especially with some of the new infrastructure that's occurring in the areas, for instance, in Point England, that one particular school in that area has now got a track, and Auckland Transport is working with the school and with Bikes and Schools to ensure that that infrastructure is well utilised outside of the school as well. So there is definitely a very strong relationship with the TravelWise program, and in fact the staff member or the regional project manager of Bikes and Schools was previously at Auckland Transport, so knows the organisation intimately.
Okay, look, I guess I want to know clearly though, is this recommendation that you're bringing to us supported by Auckland Transport's TravelWise team? That's the question.
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Walker.
Sure. Just got a couple of questions that go to the funding and leverage and associated aspects. In a number of instances, the particular project is going to use council facilities. That could be swimming pools, for example, and that's John Walker Field of Dreams. In another instance, obviously netball, using facilities that council is effectively providing. In other instances, not. For example, the Bikes for Schools is using school facilities and effectively capital that they're raising. So is there an assessment across those things and the leverage that we might be exerting in terms of, say, for Bikes for Schools, pulling in quite a substantial amount of funding that's often through fundraising and the like on the part of schools to make those things happen? I'm just, Councillor, sorry, I was just trying to
follow your question, and I just think we may be spreading our tentacles a bit too widely. The way that this works, and we all had the chance to go through the very long proposals, all of the requirements that we have to meet are met by these organisations. The wider requirements and wider relationships, I guess, are up to them, but they meet our requirements as an organisation. So I'm sorry, I've just kind of lost the thread of your thinking a little bit.
The thread that I'm putting is following on from Councillor Darby, where the Bikes and Schools has an association with Travelwise or travel planning. In similar fashion, we've got other proposals here that have relationships with other forms of funding that are part of a general context. So I'm just asking whether the context of our evaluation takes those things into consideration. So I'll just leave it at that. The other comment that I make is just around the numbers that are participating. And I just make the observation that on the face of it, a simplistic number's fine, but there's often a qualitative difference between the numbers. For example, the Foundation for the Blind, that's effectively training trainers who are going to have a significant impact on a lot of others, as compared to, say, another proposal that might just involve some visitation on the part of an individual to a swimming pool or the like. So some quite big differences there, and I don't doubt that the evaluations take that into consideration.
Yep. Okay. I think that's statement more than question. Member Wilcox.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question relates to Māori outcomes. We discussed all of this at the workshop, so I'm quite comfortable with the process so far. But we did mention in from the IR November 2016 regarding Māori outcomes for community grants. And what stuck out for me was actually we don't have that much data on how many Māori are being involved or are participating in programs that may not be directly targeted at Māori or seeking a Māori outcome. In our report here we say 3 of the 7. But I was wondering, well, perhaps we should be asking all organisations to which we give funding to report on Māori outcomes, so that the lack of knowledge that we have regarding the data actually starts to fill up. One of the things that came out of that IR November 2016 was that basically Ōrākei didn't fit in there at all, and yet I know for a fact that Ōrākei throws quite a bit of money at Māori outcomes. So, these are the things that we need to kind of fill in and work forward towards. So just because it's not aimed at Māori doesn't mean there's not a Māori outcome in the kaupapa. So I would like to see that we ensure that that data's also received from those that didn't identify Māori outcome.
If I may, through the chair. So through the funding agreement, a project-specific KPI is set for all grant recipients with an outcome to increase Māori participation in sport and recreation. So regardless of whether they have actually identified it as something specific in their funding application, it is actually a KPI or a key performance indicator within the funding agreement. So we do actually have that reported back to us.
Yeah, supplementary to that?
Yep.
Yeah, and that's fine. I think I'd just like to have some comfort in the fact that they're aware that they should be looking for those Māori outcomes as well. Not just saying, oh, well, no Māori turned up, I turned up, I got my name Wilcox, not from someone rowing a waka. So let's be honest here, sometimes Māori turn up, but not necessarily wearing the Māori guise.
If I may, just through the chair, for instance, with a previous applicant who received funding for coaching, they actually work with Heoranga Potama to actually increase Māori participation. So it's also about those relationships. And for instance, Auckland Badminton, who were going into schools, we actually ensured that they were actually going into kura kaupapa Māori schools as well, so they were actually offering the program to
So that's
those
good.
schools as well, so there were more opportunities.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing is we're actually driving some of those outcomes, and the decisions we make are to achieve them. Yep, okay, that's clear. I've got Councillor Hills, Councillor Sayers, and then Member Brown, and then I think that might be it. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. It's probably a bit of a Kathy Casey question, but obviously it says on page 23.
She just texted you.
She should
Joking, Kathy.
phone a friend. No, but we talk about the recognition of Auckland Council, and obviously it's in there and part of the funding agreement. But how is it checked up on? And when we're talking, some quite large amounts of money, how well is it recognised that Auckland Council, but also, ratepayers are funding it? So they can walk in and see this is a great event run by great people, but also I've helped actually fund this, or it's acknowledged that Auckland Council are a part of it. So I know that there might be a little line on their collateral, but how do we make sure that it's actually obvious to the participants or the parents or the whoever?
Just through the chair. So as Kerry mentioned before, there's a number of different ways that the organisations can acknowledge council, and often when they report back, they'll provide evidence of that. So whether it's photos where their signage been up, whether it's some of their resources or their brochures or their advertising material that has Auckland Council logo on it. So they will often they provide that to us as evidence. And then of course a number of the events that we across our team, across the sport and recreation team, we attend a number of these events as well. So actually see firsthand what that acknowledgement is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions just relate to, on page 20 of our agenda, item 26, the John Walker Find Your Dreams, Field of Dreams Foundation. Got about 3 questions that are probably interrelated. The first one is just given such a, with respectively to, Sir John, it's such a high-profile kind of activity we're undertaking. Do you think there's any way that might be able to become a bit more self-funding, looking at the operational costs that are associated with this in the future? Is that a possibility?
I think that probably, while we're dealing with making the decision on the grants, I think that's a wider discussion that we could probably pick up directly with the organisation or the staff, because I think that's out of the scope of this discussion today. But it's a good question. I'm sure Sir John will help you with that.
Well, I do have another further 2 questions there, Madam Chair, and that's the 230,000 that is the operational expense. In the report it mentions that that's for employee expenses, marketing and promotion, and office administration. Could I just get a feel for how many staff perhaps we're talking about in terms of the employee side of those costs? In other words, what are the employee expenses that we're funding there? And probably particularly number of people.
So in terms of actual administration staff, there's, my understanding is 1.5 FTE, and the rest are all program staff, so that's not covered within our grant. So the way the funding is provided to Find Your Field of Dreams is to support their overall kind of overhead, I guess, so that in terms of their program delivery that can be sustainable and they can access other funding for their program delivery.
Right, and still seems, just to me, it just seems a very high amount at $230,000. And just my final question was, just looking at the other programs there, like the swimming programs, the run and jump and throw, the gold lift and gold for the West programs. Is there duplication between those programs?
No, we don't believe so.
Right.
They all target very different aspects in terms of participation and target groups and outcomes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I think, Greg, your first question, just to go into detail, it's to take that straight to our staff would be a useful thing to do, I think, Councillor Sayers.
Thank you.
Member Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to explore, if you were, looking at the Tāmaki Heading Waka Fund, of which we obviously support. but the inclusion of waka as sport and an element of recreation, therefore then somebody, like, because when I read like Māori are increasing their participation in sport, the opening question I have is, well, what was the starting point for Māori? Where did you base that increase from? So when I looked at the Tāmaki Headinga Waka Festival and the criteria of that approval, then there's some elements that are absent that should be calculated into this or calibrated into this formula of Māori participation. For example, the taiaha classes, of which are multiple throughout the region, as another form of, and all of these other arts, if you were, that I'm reading is all of a sudden a sport. So there's a degree of interest around something that is an art that arguably is being interpreted and applied for as a sport. And last but not least is, because we do note the presentation of the Etude folk last week that gave us a synopsis of an increase of 10,000 of the year 2015-16 through a participation number of 35,000 for this current year, which is really great. But behind that is also still Māori at home who are demanding the time of their people at home to mow the lawns. Hey, the real simple stuff around family things that are also so valuable to family, like competing for our own people's time, whether it's sport, whether it's marae, whether it's tribal business, whatever it might be. And so I'm keen to understand at a future point, where did we start from to suggest today that Māori are increasing their participation, because I can look at that comment around associating the 1987 Rugby World Cup where the great Waka Nathan ran around or walked quickly around Eden Park with a rugby ball. He placed it in the middle and that kicked off the 1987 Rugby World Cup. And that was the Māori role and presence in its entirety for that whole campaign. Yet in 2011, there was great degree of not just Māori but our Pacifica folk as well in terms of their presence and contribution to our country. So the culture from 87 to 11 took a quantum leap in terms of the global picture. And arguably you could look at all of that in the context of today's submission and say, oh, well, that was sport. Eh? That was sport. They did the karanga, they did the waka, they did all of these things. And there's a bit missing from your analysis or your summary, and I know it's just a summary, but it wasn't really just the waka that brought people to Tāmaki Headinga Waka Festival. It was actually the people. The weather was a great couple of days. And actually this year it was kapahaka, amongst other things, and some visual tā moko on folk, especially on their faces, that attracted people outside of the event to go to the event through either hearing the kapahaka or looking at the tā moko stuff, as opposed to the core driver of it being a waka festival.
We're just having a little bit of trouble getting to the thrust of the question.
Well, I want to know in a timely manner what is the foundation of where it is this council even suggests that Māori are improving their participation in council-related sporting events. Kia ora.
Okay, so that's probably a little bit bigger than the decision about whether we fund Tāmaki Headinga Waka Trust, and I think that probably relates a little bit more to our previous item, which actually looks at the appropriate measurement tools for participation rates and how we actually get different groups involved. So I think we need to have a different discussion about participation of Māori. The key decision here is funding this trust or not, and when we have a look at who has actually put in applications, this is one of the big applications we've got for a directly Māori focused trust. to seek funding for the Waka
With respect, Madam
experience.
Chair, the John Walker Field of Dreams is actually, with respect, far more significant in the practical sense than the Tāmaki Heringa Waka Trust event. Kia ora.
Okay. So, but we're not hearing anyone saying we shouldn't fund it. That's my basic question. Just looking at what this item is fund or not fund? That's the key question. The bigger issue of Māori participation, I think we need to pick up as an ongoing issue for this committee. Yeah.
And through the chair, I'm happy to follow up with you, Member Brown, and talk to you in terms of that participation numbers and how we work with Sport New Zealand around measuring those Māori participation numbers across a period of time and how we've reached those.
Thank you.
Councillor Cooper,
Thank you. I just can't see whether it's been moved or seconded, Madam Chair.
happy to move?
Yes, I am.
Excellent.
And
Councillor
just a
Filipaina
quick
will
comment.
second.
I mean, we all have the same issues. We're all elected from our own areas, and for me, when I look at it, I'm always going, oh, you know, are my people going to, you know, get a benefit? So I was in the meeting when we went through these, and what I keep going back to is the criteria. And so these, though there were many that I would have loved to seen funded, these ones specifically met the criteria and create a kind of a balance, and they are umbrella groups. There are other avenues for other smaller groups that aren't regional, and we can make sure that, you know, they have an opportunity to apply there. So unfortunately, I think sometimes when people apply, sometimes it can be a tricky process, and they're not quite making sure they meet the criteria before they apply. So always some people will be disappointed, but there will be other avenues for them. So I commend this to the committee, Madam Chair. There's a huge amount of work being done. You know, the councillors arrive and a lot of the preliminary work is done to help us form our decisions. So thank you to the staff for that piece of work.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. So that's been moved and seconded. I think we've got most of the issues out of the way. I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. So a little bit of discussion that might need to happen directly with some of the members of the committee. Thank you. Appreciate that.